Hello, everybody. Let's begin the written and visual communication portion of this presentation. Topics of discussion. As part of the written and visual communication section, we'll review the following topics. First topic, when should we use written communication while doing business in Mexico? Afterwards, we'll look at frequently used forms of written communication, which includes business letters, emails and social media, and contracts. Finally, we'll complete the presentation with visuals used in advertisements. In Mexico, written communication for business is typically used as an introductory message to somebody you have never met. It is also used to set up the actual conversation. Significant discussions are rarely conducted through written communication. They're done in person or at least through the phone. Mexicans want a more personal touch, and written communication is regarded as impersonal. Now let's take a look at one of the more frequently used forms of written communication in Mexico, the business letter. Let's begin the business letter section with a game. Do you think business letters in Mexico tend to be more formal or less formal compared to letters written in the US? If you answered more formal, then you're correct. All business letters should begin with a formal greeting, such as greetings and salutations. Mexican business people should be addressed by the professional titles. For example, abogado, which means lawyer, or ingeniero, which means engineer, followed by a surname. If they do not have such a title or one does not know it, one should use a courtesy title such as señor. Su servidor is a common term to close a message, and it translates directly to your server. It means I am at your disposal. Next question. Do you believe business letters tend to be short and brief or long and thorough? If you guessed short and brief, then you're correct. For Americans, business letters tend to be the agreement, while for Mexicans it is used to initiate a meeting to discuss potential business. Last question. Do you think business letters tend to be more ambiguous and indirect or straight to the point? The previous question may have given this one away, but they do tend to be more ambiguous and direct. Similar to oral communication, the message tends to be more poetic and incorporate feelings. According to Richard D. Lewis's book, When Cultures Collide, Mexicans, in full fling of rhetoric, may seem to many foreigners to barely have their emotions under control. In addition, Spanish, especially Mexican Spanish, with its abundant use of diminutives and colorful imagery, is perhaps the most flowery. Please keep in mind there are subtle differences in the Spanish language used by different language countries. Because of the previous points, written communications tend to be more indirect. The message can be ambiguous at times, and this further pushes both parties to meet in person. To sum it up, everything on the left is correct, and all on the right are not. One of my interviewees was nice enough to provide me with a business letter. The letter is used to introduce an American businessman who works for a hospital in the US to a Mexican businessman who works for a hospital in Mexico. The letter was written by a mutual colleague to introduce both parties for potential collaborations. I would have provided a Google Translator version on the side, but this letter did not translate too well with Google Translate. Part of the reason is because of the poetic use of language. As mentioned before, the title of the addressee is included. It is on the second line on the left. Unlike American letters, which sometimes does not always include the addressee's title, it is a requirement to include titles. Titles are very important in Mexican culture. At the first sentence, also mentioned before, the letter begins with a formal introduction. By this means, yours faithfully, I take this opportunity to inform you Mr. De Aquino will be in Puebla on November 6th and 7th. The letter goes on to inform the addressee that the American will be in Mexico, and he looks to further discuss potential medical education exchanges of Mexican physicians to his American hospital. There is no substance to this business letter. It is a long formal request for a meeting. Half the letter is actually used to describe and introduce the American businessman. The letter is ended with the writer stating she is at his service, and even her title is included. Emails are another frequently used form of written communication for business, especially since more Mexicans are getting access to the internet. The caveat is not to become dependent on it, because similar to business letters, emails are used to set up the conversation. When I was working in one of the largest American companies in the world, the firm noticed an issue of Americans in that they're increasingly relying on emails to conduct business and avoid face-to-face meetings and phone conversations. Social media is widely used for business, even more so than in the States. Betty, one of my two interviewees, noted that Facebook and LinkedIn pages are beginning to take the place of a company's actual website. She attributes this to the fact that most of us are already on Facebook and LinkedIn, and it's just simpler to connect that way. To touch on the importance of relationship in Mexican culture, they are less like Americans in trying to keep their personal lives on Facebook separate from their careers. Here, I have an actual LinkedIn correspondence between an American businessman working at a U.S. hospital and a Mexican businessman working in a hospital in Mexico. Touching on the family aspect, since emails and social media tend to be a bit less formal than business letters, it is common to speak about families. Similar to oral communication, it is crucial to build a personal relationship with the addressee and then to naturally throw in the business proposition. Americans tend to stay away from personal relationships and get straight to business. Similar to the business letter, we see the message is ambiguous and used to set up a meeting. Something that we probably will not see much in messages between two American businessmen are the emotions shown to close messages. This touches on the emotion aspect of Mexican dialogue. Let's play another game. We will review the perception of contracts in Mexico with a true or false game. Please pause and read each line. The first bullet point is true. According to Lahar Katz's book, Negotiating International Business, signed contracts in Mexico may not always be honored. For example, payment terms are frequently violated, which is in line with Mexico's perception of time. Americans tend to abide by contract payment terms due to their respect for time. Second bullet point, also true. Not so surprisingly, contract compliance depends on the continuing relationship between the parties. This is another example of how Mexicans place more emphasis on relationships than Americans do. Third bullet point, true. A contract in Mexico can be compared more so to meeting debrief notes to summarize the discussed topics as opposed to an ironclad document. Finally, the last one, also true. This supports the previous point that contracts are more of a formality. Unlike in America where the contract is the center of the agreement, in Mexico the continuous relationship serves as the heart of the agreement. All 4 bullet points are true. Here is an important reminder to close out the written section of the presentation. Visuals used in advertising. Mexicans are very prideful. They are extremely proud of their country, and marketers have attempted to leverage that pride to market products and services to Mexicans. In this section, we'll review 3 advertisement visuals that leveraged Mexicans' love of the country. This is an image of U.S. soccer star Landon Donovan, disguised as a Mexican. In America, we tend to be more sensitive and stay away of having a person of one race portray a different race in a commercial. The commercial you're about to see is from a Mexican gambling company advertising a new game. Please pause and click on the link to access the commercial. What did you think of the commercial? Do you believe this will ever be aired in America? The commercial stereotyped Mexicans in the way they looked. Donovan dresses up as a Mexican by wearing a huge sombrero, colorful poncho, and a large mustache. According to Mexican author and social commenter Carlos Monsive, Mexicans do not care about these images, simply stating that it's hard to have national pride offended by something like this. I, however, do not 100% agree with Carlos. In addition to strong national pride, I believe the commercial was accepted in Mexico because we see an important American showing love to the country by trying to sneak into it. We will see Mexicans' national pride get tested later by a different visual. In addition to stereotyping the appearance of a Mexican man, the commercial also jokes about illegal immigration. The article noted political correctness is not as important in Mexico as it is in America. Even though the use of stereotypes may be more lax in Mexico, companies, especially global companies, should stay away from imagery that may potentially be inappropriate in other parts of the world. For example, Absolut, the global vodka company, launched an ad in Mexico City that appealed to Mexicans, but not so much to Americans. It was successful in leveraging Mexicans' love of the nation. This advertisement was used in Mexico City, but it made its way back to the States, and Absolut had to issue an apology for the ad. If you recall, I noted Mexicans' national pride would be tested, and it was with this ad. This commercial aired in Europe, but it made its way back to Mexico. This ad by Burger King was supposed to show how the larger Texan got along with the inferior and smaller Mexican. The stereotypes in the soccer star commercial were perceived as generally positive stereotypes, while the stereotypes in this ad are inarguably negative. What frustrated Mexicans the most was the use of the flag. Throwing the flag in there as part of the punchline really angered Mexicans. Similar to Americans, Mexicans have strong feelings toward their flag. Burger King had to issue an apology. To wrap up this section, please keep these points in mind the next time you do business in Mexico. Do not rely on written communication to conduct business. Use it to set up the actual business meeting. Keep the written message brief and do not give too much of the potential discussion away. Mexicans look forward to building a relationship, and being just a pen pal will not get you too far. When advertised in Mexico, Mexicans will respond strongly to visuals related to the country, culture, and flag. Just be mindful of the use of visuals to ensure that it is a positive response. Zach will now talk about business customs in Mexico.